Okay, everybody, welcome. I'm Joanna Picori. I'm the director of the Asian Arts and Culture Center. And thank you all for joining us this evening for this panel discussion featuring Asia and Maryland artists Yifan Luo, Ellie Rha, and Kiddo Pan, and hosted by WeiAnne Reidy. This program complements the Asian Arts and Culture Center's current exhibition curated by Asian Arts and Culture Center Program Manager Nerissa Paglinawan. And the show is called Asia in Maryland. I guess I didn't say that yet. And the exhibition showcases the stories and facilitates dialogues about the ideas and issues that are most important to Maryland's 500,000 plus Asian and AAPI residents. The 33 AIM 2021 featured artists of diverse ages have cultural roots in Afghanistan, China, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Iran, Korea, Mongolia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Uzbekistan. Artists were selected through an open call for submissions, so the show represents a random, self-selected cross-section of the Asian and AAPI visual arts community. The works in the show are as diverse and individualized as the artists. Some works utilize and incorporate traditional techniques and motifs with some modern takes, while others address themes of representation, responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, identity, immigration, memory, cultural reclamation and appropriation, climate change, gender equality, and existence, the cycle of life. So tonight's program features 3 of these artists, Yifan Luo, Kiddo Pan, and Ellie Rha, and they were invited to participate in tonight's program because the work that they submitted to the show addresses the topic of representation. Asian Arts and Culture Center Program's Graduate Assistant WeiAnne Reidy moderates the discussion. The exhibit and accompanying programs increase awareness and understanding that Asian arts and culture and our Asian and AAPI neighbors are not foreign, but are integral to the communities we call home. With these programs, Asian Arts and Culture Center continues its 50-year anniversary celebration, Elevation, honoring AAPI experiences. Our upcoming programs include 2 sessions of our virtual community festival, Our Stories, and it will be taking place on October 21st and 28th at 7 p.m. And we will put the link in the chat for registration. And then on November 30th, we will have a recital of the Towson University Cambodian and World Music Ensembles. The Cambodian ensemble is part of a program that AANCC partners on with the music department at Towson, and we offer it every semester. And the ensemble is led by master musician Chum Ngek, who is a Maryland resident. So it's also kind of part of our bigger Asia in Maryland programming, which is an ongoing series. And I invite, it's a live in-person program at 8 p.m. on November 30th. And you'll be amazed at how quickly and how well these students can learn to play Cambodian music in 1 semester. And we also have a limited number of Korean kite making kits that integrate art, social studies, and engineering. You can order the kits by following the link that we will put in the chat. Before introducing WeiAnne, I'd like to note that the Asian Arts and Culture Center is a self-support department of Towson University. That means we have to raise all of the money needed for our operations and programs from memberships, grants, sponsorships, and individual donations. I would like to thank all of you who have already contributed. We can't sustain our programming without you. If you've not already done so, please make a donation tonight to show your support by going to our website. You can donate from almost any page on the sidebar. There's also a support us page which describes the many ways you can support us, and we are now putting a link in the chat to that page. I'd also like to thank generous donors who have made this season's programs possible. The Maryland State Arts Council, the Asian Arts and Culture Center members, the citizens of Baltimore County, Yoshinobu and Kathleen Shiota, Central Baltimore Partnership, Towson University College of Fine Arts and Communication, the Roe and Marius P. Johnson Legacy Charitable Fund, the Towson University Department of Music, the Harold J. Kaplan Foundation, the Towson University Marketing and Communications Office, the Towson University COFAC Diversity and Inclusion Committee, Robert Mintz and Beth Arman, Anthony and Bonnie Montcalmo, Alexander Nagel, Connie Rosemont and John Greenberg, Baltimore Changwon Sister City Committee, closed were the days. Thanks again to all of you who support us. For those who haven't yet contributed, please know that every dollar counts. Please donate $1 or more tonight. Finally, please complete our evaluation after the program. Your feedback is essential to keeping our programs funded. We will put that link in the chat. I'd like to now turn the program over to WeiAnne Reidy. WeiAnne is a graduate assistant for the graduate assistant for programs at the Asian Arts and Culture Center. She is a graduate student in Towson University's Counseling Psychology Master's Program. She specializes in grief counseling with a focus on racialized trauma. She's particularly interested in bringing justice-centered care to the queer Asian diaspora by expanding the models of movement and play therapy and exploring the intersections of cultural identity and LGBTQ+ experiences. WeiAnne has curated and organized several art and culture events along the AAPI artists in the DC and Baltimore area. She's co-founded and coordinated collectives that offer artwork and creative services to redistribute mutual aid funds into Baltimore City and distribute over 300 no-cost herbal care packages to Black communities. WeiAnne also is an artist who explores the connection between traditional Chinese medicine, tattooing, and woodblock printing. WeiAnne can tell you more about tonight's program and will introduce the artists.
Thank you, Joanna, for that beautiful introduction, and to both you and Nerissa for these events. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. I hope you're excited as I am to talk about these topics tonight. I've so been looking forward to the discussion, and I'm just so delighted to be here to hear the perspectives of Ellie, Kiddo, and Yifan, and to be sharing space with you all. We, the Asian Arts and Culture Center, are calling in tonight from occupied Piscataway lands in Maryland. I welcome you all to say hello and drop your name and where you are tuning in from in the chat. And please feel free to ask questions and interact in the chat throughout the discussion. We'll be compiling your questions and discussing them near the end of our time together, and there'll be multiple opportunities to interact. Tonight, Yifan, Ellie, and Kiddo will be sharing their experiences and reflections on the intersections between media representations of Asians and AAPIs and the ways that the consequent perceptions manifest themselves in many aspects of society. Particularly, we will be sharing about how art can serve as activism, be a source of cultural power, and play a role in correcting and realigning current representations and perceptions. Okay, so here is our event. Can we move to the next slide, please? All right, so our panelists tonight are Ellie Rha, Yifan Luo, and Kiddo Pan. We can move on to the next slide. And before we get started tonight, we're just gonna go over a few guidelines for all of us in the space together. We are in this space with respect for each other as our full selves and with the knowledge and stories of our ancestors. Particularly for the amazing presenters tonight, we engage in deep listening and honor the intersectionalities along with the wide range of experiences across the Asian diaspora. We encourage you to check in with and take care of yourselves. You are your own best tool. And thank you all for being here and for your participation in our space. So our guidelines are: engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge the power of listening and sharing perspectives, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, balance speaking and listening, hold one another accountable with care. All right, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so everyone in the Zoom call tonight, As we dive into the artist introductions, we invite you to share in the chat what or who do you think of when considering Asians or AAPIs in the media? So who do you think of when thinking about Asians or Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the media? And that question is in the chat, so we can move on to the next slide. All right, so we are introducing our first artist, Ellie. Ellie Rha is a filmmaker, photographer, creative director, and creator from Queens, New York. She is currently studying film and media studies at Johns Hopkins University. The photo on the screen is part of a photo series that focuses on food as a love language between generations, covering gaps language and words cannot cover. She states, for underrepresented groups, the representation they see in the media industry, from filmmakers to film reviewers, creates a sense of validation and community for these creatives to not just feel hopeful about their work, but confident that their voice and therefore their existence is powerful, changing harmful norms. I know I'm looking forward to hearing more about the powerful and dynamic projects Ellie is working on. Please welcome Ellie Rha.
Does everyone see the PowerPoint? Wonderful. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm so happy to just be here with so many people, and also just reading everyone's replies to that question is already creating such a wonderful space. And I'm very grateful to share that space with everyone today. Just so I wanted to kind of introduce myself a little as well. Ellie Rha from New York. Preferred pronouns are she, her. And what I bring to the table is a lot of creative direction, filmmaking, photography, and this innate analytical approach to all my creative processes, which inherently means a lot of my work slowly morphs into the space of social media and tech and marketing, and something that I'm learning to embrace as I look for more and more people in my artistic community. So as I was thinking of the question, what and who do you think of when considering Asians or AAPIs in the media? I was just so excited to talk about it because there's so much media to talk about. So before I go into everything that I am doing currently in terms of that representation, I just wanted to give a quick screenshot for everyone to kind of check back later and to see kind of what inspires and validates a lot of my work and my experiences from a lot of these Asian American, and Black artists, thinkers, writers, and just powerful creatives. So how it's organized is the middle box at the top are movies, and below that are some really great artists, from photographers, creative directors, and other people who work in fashion and beauty, who I think are very powerful and doing very powerful things. To the right, we have a lot of really great thinkers, really great writers that I think are very helpful, not just in terms of representation, but like I've been saying, validating what it means to have such a really powerful intersectional identification. And last, I have two exhibits that I really enjoy. Unfortunately, both you can no longer see in person. The second one being, it was during the 1980s, but you can still see both online, and I would say they're very inspiring. So yeah, I just wanted to summarize what really inspires me before I begin to talk about a lot of my work. And also, hopefully, you can use this to also inspire yourself. Okay. So starting last spring, I helped launch the Lago Collective. I just felt that a lot of my experiences in traditional fashion magazine work as an art director, and a lot of the social media marketing work I had been doing, would help me be strong enough to go stag and create my own community, and with a lot of the intentional works that I wasn't seeing in the different internships or partnerships or collaborations that I've been doing before, and knew that my community really needed and I think would benefit from. So this was launched through different magazine issues, and our first one was in June. And this is just a quick screen grab of our website, so you can kind of see exactly the vibe we're looking for. We're very colorful, we're very welcoming, and it says exactly what we mean. It's we're here to make our own space. So first is one of our second issues. It's called The Monolith and the Monolid. It was posted on Instagram and Facebook as Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok as a digital issue. And it was focused on this idea of relearning and validating through a series of personal interviews. We also had makeup tutorials by certain artists and a variety of editorial looks, because we wanted to curate makeup and use it as a way to control and the narrative around our supposed monolithic racial identities, and take back a lot of the narratives that the fashion and beauty industry have kind of perpetuated through their lack of diversity in shapes and sizes. And we're specifically pointing out monolids and rounded faces. So here for me, a lot of representation means a collective experience. And sometimes that can mean a lot of relearning with your community, which doesn't always have to be painful, which is something that this issue really wants to demonstrate. It's something that can be just as beautiful and just as collaborative. Second, we have our third issue called How to H-Mart 4 Generations of Eating Good-Ass Food. It's an 8-page zine. It's printed on newspaper tabloid, and it comes with a really great 9-sticker sheet. Actually, one of our graphic designers who designed the whole thing is actually in this chat. Shout out, Maddie. So this issue is focused on discussing how food is culture, and food is that emotional connection to your community and who you are. And as we see this rise in just Asian cuisine, there's this idea that you do have to be respectful. So using interviews with 8 different people ranging from the ages of 11 all the way to 60, you kind of get to see a very close snapshot of the best tips, tricks, and experiences of Asian food, specifically Korean food at H-Mart. So this is currently available for purchase at the Hunting Ground in Baltimore, but you can also, if you would like one, DM me as well. I think we have a couple left. But for me, what this issue was super important because it demonstrates how representation can also look like building a community and redefining and remembering how beautiful it is to share culture and experiences when it is very respectful. And again, it's focused on this idea that not everything can be just as beautiful as long as you're respecting the community behind it. And this is just my latest project. I'm currently working on a narrative short film called 잘 먹겠습니다, which means I will enjoy this food. And it covers everything you're not supposed to talk about, much less consider as a Korean American woman. So it talks a lot about religion, gender, sexuality, and generational differences. And this is all through the conversation of food, which is something that I'm very interested in, as I feel like it's a very big part of my culture and how I see myself connecting with a lot of people that I'm very close with. And for me, a lot of this project came from, I had submitted this script and was told that it should be written in English. And I just knew immediately that that was not, this use of Korean wasn't a fractured experience, is very important. And it was very important to, it just proved to me even more how much that film needed to be in that space. And so for me, representation with this film has taught me a lot about the power of presence, which is even greater than just representation. So that means that you have the writers are being Korean, you have a crew that's all people of color and all intersectional in their different identities, because that helps you create the exact film that people are looking for. And I was told that maybe this is too niche of an idea, but across our socials, we've seen a lot of people resonating with that. So I think that's what's very powerful, is this film is kind of proving that whatever the industry status quo is no longer needed to essentially be successful. And I think that's very inspiring. So just wanted to include some quick social media bits if we do want to connect after this. But as we continue with this panel, I do want to just clarify that I hope to bring forth a really great perspective that I have on creating art that is outside of my monolithic racial identity, because it is based on real experiences and based on this desire to relearn with my community. And also share just how I feel like a lot of people of color are forced with this emphasis on sharing everything that's traumatizing. But I find that in my art, it's very powerful to look at the silences and things that are very beautiful, because those are very much enough. And your pain does not have to divulge itself to you or anyone for worth. So I'm very excited to talk more about that as we continue with the panel.
Wow, Ellie, thank you so much. I'm so deeply resonating with what you just said about the power of silence and like that being enough. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that, if you share more about that. And I have to stop by the hunting ground and pick up an issue. And thank you all for continuing to introduce yourselves and sharing the Asian and AAPI figures you think of in the chat. The next artist we will be introducing is Kiddo Pan. Kiddo is an illustrator and street artist who grew up in beautiful Inner Mongolia, China. Her practice derives from nature, the street, and everything in between. Kiddo uses traditional and experimental tools to tell the stories of underrepresented people we need to shed light on. Particularly, Kiddo's work explores themes of sacred meanings, cultural power, and stories about seeking truth. The image displayed is part of the project Face Change, and the costume design shown is based on the bat character from shamanism, a religion among Mongolian people. And in recent times, understanding of shamanism has shifted away from the true meaning in a way that undervalues and misconstrues the religion and its rituals. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Kiddo. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. Hello, everyone. So today, I want to talk a little bit about my journey when it comes to using my art as a way of expressing my cultural identity. And for me, the journey was slow and bumpy, and I want to use fish don't know water to summarize it because like fish don't really know what water is, but the moment when they are out of water, they immediately realize that water is so important to them. And that's exactly how I feel about me and my culture. So I am from Inner Mongolia, China, and I am Mongolian minorities. But these are the work I made before I came to United States before 2019. And they are like having culture references from every part of the world because I wasn't really think too much about my identity as Chinese because like when I was home, everyone is Chinese. And I didn't think too much about my identity as Mongolian minority either because every time I bring up this fact to strangers, like I might face some stereotypes throwing straight at my face. So I was kind of having a low self-esteem about my cultural identity, so I kind of shy away from it. But after, in 2019, I came to the States. I came to MICA to study for my MFA, and we have a exhibition called Image Harvest. And like at that moment, life was a rush for me. I don't really have great ideas, and I decided to take a shot and finding inspiration from one of my folklores in my hometown. It's about a boy and his horse. And I made these pop-up books based on the story, and the design of the book is inspired by the traditional house of Mongolian people. I have no idea whether people will like this idea, but it turned out to be pretty interesting to people, and they show a lot of curiosity to me. And I realized that maybe like people outside my hometown don't really know much about my culture, and I should be representing it. And in 2020, I decided to go further in this direction. And at that time, I started to make street art. I was interested in making murals. And so I decided to Photoshop this design on a giant wall. And then I was like, since this is digital, can I just animate it? Because I was also interested in animation. And when it comes to choosing the figure, I chose my cousin because she was like the person I look up to a lot. I learned a lot from her, and Like she's also Mongolian minority, but she's like inspiring kids in my hometown about the world outside. And she's having depression at the time. And so I decided to cheer her up with this work. And she really loves it. And in 2021, the Asian hate crime became a very big issue. And I started to look for representations in media that I feel relate to, that have Asian face in them. And I end up finding some good movies produced by Chinese movie companies, and I just draw my face into their characters. So this is Chinese mythology. I think it's the best Chinese animation so far. And this, The Wandering Earth, is a Chinese sci-fi movie about when the sun dies down, people on Earth build thousands of thrusters to push Earth away and find a new sun to give power to the Earth. And I did the same with one of the characters. I think that's a way to empower myself, knowing that there are very good characters portrayed in media that I feel related to. And this is the piece of art that was included in the exhibition. It's called Mouth on Fire. And for me, the story tells about the media propaganda and how harmful that can be. So in this work, I use the fire as a metaphor of the propaganda, and I again use this character that was dressed in Mongolian traditional coats that kind of represents me. And this is the antagonist of the antagonist character of the story. It's a bat that is kind of manipulating the fire. So and in my hometown, like there's shamanism, religion, like used to be something very, very sacred and serious, but nowadays a lot of people are just like pretending to be able to practice its rituals, but they have no experience or knowledge of the religion. They just want to make money from this. And I think that fits perfectly well with this character in my story. So I drew inspirations from the design, including the skull and like the big eyebrows and this fire patterns on the cheek, as well as this colored stripe decorations. I used spray paints to color those fabrics because I think that's how I make my street art, and that fits perfectly well for this art. And at the same time, like this project is like a way for me to bring all of my interests together, including like street art, animation, music production, and costume design together. And it's very meaningful to me. And this is a pattern I made about Baltimore and Maryland 2 years ago, which is all the nature and cultural symbols that represents the state of Maryland. Like people talk about the bird and the flower a lot, and I think these are the things that represents people here in Maryland. And like moving on from this project, after living here in Baltimore for 2 years, I have seen a lot of Baltimore and Maryland culture from my own eyes, and based on the things I'm interested in, and also the Stop Asian Hate campaign. This is the most recent art I made about that, how I see that represents Baltimore and Maryland a lot. And I hopefully I can make more art about my cultural identity in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiddo. Your work is so creative and powerful, and it's just so evident to me the amount of intention that goes into each of your pieces. I really love the metaphor that you brought up too about fish being out of water. Thanks for sharing that. And as mentioned before, all the artists speaking tonight are in the Asia in Maryland exhibition that you are welcome to come visit through December 11th, and you can view Kiddo's costume design there in person. And our next artist is Yifan Luo. Yifan is a Baltimore-based illustrator who draws inspiration from the people, environment, foods, and memories of the places that she has traveled and lived. She is particularly interested in editorial, publishing, and sequential projects that explore current events, intersectional environmentalism, and multiculturalism. The artworks pictured on the screen is entitled AAPI Role Models, a series of portraits of Asian heritage, artists, and activists. Yifan shared, outside of my own family, I had few Asian role models growing up and hope that this series helps introduce others to some of the many AAPI and Asian heritage powerhouses who have influenced my own work and activism in recent years. My sense of identity continues to shift and evolve, and the COVID-19 pandemic spurred uniquely complicated associations and experiences for many Asian identifying people in Maryland and beyond. And for many, it became a time of meaningful self-reflection, education, and action. Yifan, I'm so looking forward to hearing more. Welcome.
Thank you so much for that wonderful intro. And wow, I just want to say, Ellie and Kiddo, I'm so honored to share the space with you. And it's going to be really hard to follow, but I'm excited to tell you a little bit about my work. And so I've just kind of prepared an overview of some recent things I've been working on and that I'm interested in, as well as some particular pieces that I think relate to today's talk. So hello once more. My name is Yifan Luo, and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm currently based in Baltimore. I actually went to the same MFA program that Kiddo was in, and so I got to see a lot of those pieces and see the process behind those. And so it's really great to sort of hear this different perspective about her work now. And I would say my focus is primarily visual journalism, and I define that as really just capturing the here and now. And yeah, let's see, tell you a little bit more just about my geographical path. WeiAnne had mentioned that I'm interested in work that explores multiculturalism. And so for me, just sort of showing you my geographical path, I think gives you a sense for my roots and where I come from and how I identify culturally. So I was born in Chengdu, China, and lived there for a short time before spending a lot of my formative years in Belgium, and then moved to the US, as a child around age 9. And I've lived in several parts of the country, including both coasts and in the Midwest and the South before landing in Baltimore for grad school. So I'm sort of, in some ways identify as a third culture kid, in a sense that I spent a lot of my formative time in a different country from where I kind of now identify with as home, and was born in a separate location from both of those. And yeah, my path to becoming an illustrator has not been straightforward and linear. This is one of my favorite illustrations by Leanna Fink that I think sort of encompasses a lot of different emotions, but that kind of in between really beautifully. And I've always loved art and really considered myself a creative person growing up, but I was also interested in a lot of other topics. And I think, sort of during my career path between being in school and then coming back to grad school, which spanned almost a decade, I really did a lot of self-reflection and trying to figure out, how my culture and upbringing might have sort of affected the path that I took, and then what things I kind of kept coming back to in the projects that I would pursue, both professional and personal. And I think at the heart of a lot of my interests and jobs is, a deep curiosity for the world and the people in it, and a desire to build community. And for me, that wasn't always explicitly, people that I share, cultural or like racial community with. But I think especially as I got to spend some time in grad school exploring that through visual journalism, I've been able to maybe articulate some of those things a little bit more for myself. And it continues to be, I think, a work in progress as I continue learning more about myself and my communities. So here are some works that I've done recently that sort of capture this love of community building and just being around people and capturing the here and now, as I mentioned before. I like doing a lot of live sketching or things inspired by art, or maybe going into spaces where photography might not be welcome and bringing my sketchbook with me. That middle image there is from when, a few friends and I got our vaccine and just they weren't allowing photography in the convention center. And so it was just sort of my way of trying to encapsulate this really strange moment in time. We were sitting in that sort of area that they make you wait for to make sure you don't have any symptoms. And just this capturing the hard red line between like the people who had gone through and the people that weren't there yet. The work, on the left, top left is from the Baltimore Waverly Farmers Market. On the bottom left, I did a series of painting to raise awareness and money for the wildfires in California in the fall of 2020. And then the piece on the right is a sort of visual essay that was a work in progress inspired by my grandparents who were naturalized a few years ago and were voting for the first time in 2020. So a lot of inspiration from life and things that I've experienced or that have a connection to me. And I was living in California for a long time, so that was sort of the connection with that bottom piece. And I also find connectivity in my work through materials and textures. On the right is a portrait of Suni Lee that is included in the exhibition. And then on the left is just a personal still life. And I'm really drawn to these juicy palettes and working traditionally and exploring different materials, traditional materials. I wanted to include the other portraits. I wasn't sure if they were going to be in the slideshow, but these are the ones that are currently on view at the Asian Arts and Culture Center. And so from left, you have Chanel Miller, Gemma Chang, Grace Lee Boggs, and Varshini Prakash, who I'll probably talk about a little bit more later in the panel discussion. And I wanted to just go through a few more pieces. This is really just my exploration of the pandemic and being a Baltimore resident and trying to connect with the community here. So I did a series of illustrated interviews with different small businesses. And this is one that specifically was a restaurant called the Land of Kush, and so their struggles and just really trying to get a sense of this completely different world of retail and what that was like for them switching gears during the pandemic. And I ended up doing a whole series of these kinds of interviews and essays and visual fragments as part of my thesis. You can see some of these on my website. So just giving you a preview of the types of work I'm interested in. Visual journalism can also be just little sound bites from different people. I think it's important to me. Like one of the ways I build community is finding diverse perspectives and sort of pulling them into this collective narrative that tells a more dynamic story than maybe the one that I, was experiencing or am experiencing. This was another one about the pandemic and specifically educators K through 12 and sort of their experiences. And I'm always really interested in going into a project with an open mind. I think I was initially going to focus this on their personal struggles during a year of online remote learning. But as I spoke to more educators, it became apparent that they were really mostly fixated on ways to encourage their students and make them feel seen and supported. And so that was really the thing that ended up coming out of this project. And so I think it's, part of doing visual journalism has been really great because I get to find out these things that I wasn't anticipating at all at the onset. one more kind of pandemic related thing. This was about, different purchases that people made that sort of brought them comfort throughout the pandemic. And again, I talk about this idea of like a collective feeling, even though this doesn't feature specific people, and some of these things are, very specific to a certain maybe socioeconomic groups, or people, may not relate to that specific item. I feel like it was a nice way to show what some people in my extended network were doing to cope, and that feeling of like maybe treating yourself, or indulging in baking, or some of these creature comforts that you wouldn't normally do, I think was a very relatable way to encapsulate like a very odd time for many of us. Okay, I just want to show two more pieces that I think sort of relate to some of those interests that WeiAnne had mentioned. I try to pair as much as possible with organizations that share similar values. So this is work that I've done for a nonprofit that works with new immigrants to the US, and tries to make them feel welcome and create community programming that speaks to them culturally. And so this is different recipes from people all over the world. This is a Latvian recipe, and this is actually, I think, a Native American tea, and just kind of collected together. And I think it's free for anyone to download online, but it's also meant for community organizers to consider, including some of these cuisines when they're creating these events, just to, keep it from, I don't know, being, I guess, the maybe generic food that you're used to seeing at like a community event. I thought that was a really beautiful concept. And then this is something I did for the city of Baltimore around food waste. I'm really interested in how composting and food waste relates to, creating jobs in Baltimore, and how it affects the air quality. There's all these different effects. And this is just one slide of a few different books of a zine that actually is currently being passed out at the farmers market. So if you ever go, or if you want a copy, let me know. And then I also try to have fun and add whimsy in my work. So I included this little gift that, again, similar topic. I was doing a lot of work around the pandemic, but more of a funny look at like, all the items we were hoarding and the hair that was being grown out during 2020, and kind of encapsulating that in a, maybe lighter hearted way. The final piece I wanted to share with you all is just, I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly, but I think it dovetails nicely into our conversation. I think for me, personal narrative tends to sometimes become something bigger and more research-based once I dive into a topic. So I started making this zine that was mostly about my own personal experiences with the early days of the pandemic and wearing a mask, and the stigma that I felt was associated with that. And it quickly sort of became more about, being a model minority, and maybe these more metaphorical masks that we sometimes wear to protect ourselves, and sort of dovetailing into other social issues that I was experiencing and dealing with, especially when with the rise of Asian hate crimes. And so I thought, that was like a really interesting thing that I've sort of learned about some of my work, is that I think, again, we'll talk about this more in the following minutes, but how personal work can sort of maybe inadvertently become part of our activism and our own just learning and unlearning. And then the last slide I'll end on here is just some inspirations, if anybody is interested. This is both inspiration for form and substance for me, things I was reading recently while making some of those works. And yeah, they're both collections of really interesting types of visual essays, as well as people's, like a personal account of a family history of being a refugee, and a collection of really interesting thoughts of just being an Asian American woman experiencing, being a young adult in New York City. All these different things I think are kind of give a sense of the multifaceted types of, inspiration that I think we can all draw from. And I wanted to share them in case they provide some inspiration or entertainment for others. Yeah, that's all I have for now. So thank you all so much for your time.
Wow, thank you so much, Yifan. Your work is just so vibrant and layered with attention to detail, like the textures and the palettes, and the Waverly Farmers Market images and Land of Kush just gave me so much joy. I have the zine that you shared, and now I know that you made it, and that is just so cool to me. And also, I just love how you shared all those images about different stages of life transition throughout this pandemic. I know that resonated with me, and I wonder if it does for the rest of us. Yeah, and for all the artists, I just love seeing all of your connections to the Baltimore community in your work. It's just so genuine and appreciated. And I agree so much with what's been shared in the chat. Like, this is our story, and you all have contributed so much in all your different ways and perspectives and intentions. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to be hearing about it tonight. We're going to dive into some questions, and for everyone in the chat, you're more than welcome to drop anything that you would like to share, reactions, questions for the artists. We'd love to hear all of that. So our first question is, what importance does making work that reflects one's cultural or racial identity hold for you? Or how has your work changed to encompass parts of your identity over time?
Yeah, I think I'll start with this one. I definitely feel that, any artist is going to gravitate towards work that has some personal significance to them. And sometimes that's more subtle, more explicit. Sometimes we're not even aware of it until someone else points it out. Or as Kiddo had mentioned, when you come out of your natural environment and realize that something is actually important to you. And I think as an illustrator, illustration in general is all about communicating ideas. And so I feel like maybe my answer is a little bit different than what other people would say, but because I am specifically interested in visual narratives and specific moments in time and place, I think my work is inextricably tied to different parts of my identity. But I also find that sometimes, I'm still learning about myself and my culture. For instance, I don't feel like I know as much as I would like to know about, Chinese politics or things that relate to the place that where my family is from and where a lot of my close family members still reside. And so that's something that I think, both artists and any creative is constantly finding out those things about themselves. And I think the work will evolve to reflect that. But I also think sometimes, especially if we're very clearly projected as being Asian, some of those, or anything that we project, oh, maybe this person is clearly a certain religion or something or other, and that's how people perceive us. I feel like that's what we're expected to make work about or have a say in. And I also think it's important to honor those other facets of our personalities or identities that may not be as outwardly obvious. Yeah. So.
I also think that when you're making work that does reflect your cultural racial identity, that in a very different way, it helps you become more intimate with people that you already have in your close circle. It might even provide you an excuse to get closer with a lot more people. I know whether that is your parents, your grandparents, or maybe individuals that you've always wanted to meet and never have. I know during quarantine, I did a project called 321 Kimchi, which is what my grandma says instead of cheese. And it was this idea that I was stuck in my house. All I have are these scrapbooks my parents have of their lives. And that was the first real time that I got to kind of see both of my parents as just people growing up, which I feel like a lot of immigrants aren't afforded that luxury. And a lot of children of immigrants also aren't afforded that connectivity as well. And so creating art that is cultural and reflective, I feel like also helps foster relationships with people that you want to grow closer to in ways that maybe you don't know how to. And I think that inherently is important just as a basis to start, because all your art will always, like Yifan said, be a reflection of you. So starting at a grounded level like that, I feel has been very powerful.
So talk further about my experience fish out of water, I found myself in a stronger sense of place. And I think for me, cultural identity had been formed through the struggle in the different environments. It seemed to be enforced by my awareness of what is no longer with me anymore. And so I used to think my cultural identity is like insignificant or something I don't want to show people, but in the process of art creation, I think it's also self-affirming. It really helps with me like building my cultural identity.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing. So we'll move on to our next question. And that is, what does AAPIs and Asians being seen and heard in the media look like for you? And is representation enough? If not, what is necessary to go beyond that? And Ellie, if you would like to start us off, that would be great.
Yeah. I know for me, when I think of media, immediately I think of movies. That's just first what comes to mind. And so representation, and specifically, I feel like the film industry means not just seeing Asians and Asian Americans on screen, but it's also seeing that they were the writers of those stories. They were the people that were controlling the camera. They were the producers. They were someone who brought everything together. I think you can't cherry pick that kind of representation, because then it's not. And I feel like that is something that we're seeing a lot with a lot of tokenization that's being mistaken for representation. So that's something that I feel I just am very inspired by a lot of, if you saw, I had like Fanon and Césaire, who are super like revolutionary thinkers, I think, in terms of like decolonialist, and they're just focused on how representation isn't enough, because you shouldn't be looking up at people and the systems that are not made for you and are not there to benefit you. So it's a lot of this idea that I've kind of taken, and I've been trying to share with as many creatives as possible, is like looking horizontally. And that's not just at friends and family, but that's also just like artists maybe around your age or who's accessible to you in your area, because that is also just as powerful to create, because that community is something that you can't really break. And if the representation in media is not giving you that, then you kind of will be able to create that yourself as well. And I also think representation in media doesn't just look like that. I think you can't just have just artists coming together and that will be enough. For me, I think a lot of representation is like confronting maybe a professor if they show a very triggering movie that shows a stereotype that shouldn't be perpetuated, or it's helping someone if you see that their name is like incorrectly told multiple times, even though you're like, that was enough. I think at that point, you just have to build to that level. And about it, it's like, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's like you're chipping at the iceberg every single time that you do say something like that. And that is activism every little spot. So I think that has been very grounding for me when thinking about my contributions, but also how this is like an extremely wide problem, but every little thing you do is just as powerful.
I definitely think that the representation of Asian and AAPI on TV and film are not enough. Like, they are so rarely represented in mainstream media that sometimes some people even believe that Asians don't belong here in America or anywhere else other than Asian countries. Like, I have this experience of being in a few blocks away from my home, also still in Baltimore City, where there was a neighborhood full of African American people, and I was with my friend. We were both Asian, and people there just talk about us like, where do these white people came from? And I was surprised because we're obviously not white, and probably they haven't really seen a lot of Asian in real life or on TV, and I think that's a big problem. And But as a matter of fact, there's a lot of movies based on Asian stories, such as modified from cartoons, from like Japanese manga and Chinese stories. But the problem is a lot of time they cast white people to play Asian character, or even though they are using Asian character, they sometimes let Korean people to play Chinese or Chinese people to play Vietnamese. Like it always lack of this accuracy, and like well, things like that is getting better nowadays, I believe. But think about like how many years the gap was between before Crazy Rich Asian. Like the previous movie that was all Asian were like in 25 years ago. And like how many movies was produced during these 25 years? Probably like thousands. And we have 2 movies to that belongs to Asians only. And like Yifan said, growing up, she has just a few role models that she can like look up to, a few Asian role models, like, because Asian can be the leading actors in their own story. And also a lot of times when some movies are targeting the international box office, some movies will cast some very famous Chinese actors, and they will only show up for like 3 seconds in the movie. And a lot of people from China will go to the cinema to watch those a few seconds. And that clip was actually added out when the movie was shown in other countries. So if these people are casting Chinese actors just to make money from us instead of highlighting our people, that's like, we shouldn't be paying for those kind of acts. And also I think for me, it's like, I'm glad to see more and more Chinese representations, but Chinese representation doesn't equal Asian representation. I want to see more and more people from other countries being represented in the American TV.
Kiddo, I loved just like all of those points. I think that is something I was really thinking about when I had watched Shang-Chi recently, and also was reflecting on Crazy Rich Asians and how representation isn't having the same actors twice in 2 blockbusters, which is exactly what happened there. And I also think both of those movies are very important because they were able, like you said, like to have that diversity that we haven't seen in like, unfortunately, 25 years. But it's also being like, that is not enough. And the fact that they keep using the same actors just shows that it's the presence that matters in the industry. It's not just having the repetition of what's familiar. Because I have slowly seen how when you do have those situations where you're too comfortable with what that industry has given you, that prevents you from reaching for what you actually deserve, which is just having even more and even more of those films. I know that when I was promoting my latest project, which is the short narrative I'm working on, one of the videos did super well on TikTok, where I was discussing like, name multiple queer Asian American coming of age films, because I can only name like a few on like one hand. And it got to the point that everyone sat there and they're like, yeah, we can only name the half of it. And we can only name To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which is not part of that category. So I was sitting there and I was like, yeah, that just makes sense. You just need to have to the same level, if not more. And I think, thank you, Kiddo, for bringing that up. That was just beautiful.
Yeah, and I think even another, oh yeah, there's some really cool or good points in the chat that I'm just seeing now with James like listing films that, from Kiddo's point about, you know, casting white actors in these Asian narratives. And I think even just thinking back to like my education and learning about professionals and other media, or even in art, like I feel like there's still such a heavy emphasis on, you know, dead white guys. And it's like, it sounds almost like a parody at this point, but you know, that's also really important for young creatives who are looking for inspiration. Like if I want to look, you know, for, I don't know, like queer coming of age Asian movies, like I'm not going to be able to find that in a textbook, or even, you know, I'm sure like my professors wouldn't know where to point me, but like I would probably be looking to my peers or other, you know, queer Asians to get that information. And that it's kind of sad that, you know, it's not something that somebody who's young and might not have that network would like stumble upon and see on their own. And I think that prevents a lot of people from pursuing things that they would maybe have had exposure to if, you know, they saw more people that looked like them and that they identified with in the media. I feel like this conversation actually, you know, leads really well into our next question. And I don't want to take up too much space. So I'm like wondering if yeah, you want to move on to that, because I have more thoughts that I think relate to what we're currently speaking on.
Yeah, Yifan, I was just thinking that how really at transitions and just wow, you all have touched on so many things like tokenization being mistaken for representation and all the various disgraces and shames that have happened, like particularly, for example, Kiddo bringing up like white actors being cast for Asian roles and like this huge gap. So our next question is, what current narratives, misrepresentations, or misperceptions in media are especially needing correction?
Yeah, I definitely think Ellie and Kiddo touched on a lot of this like really beautifully, with, you know, definitely this idea that just because there's an Asian actor in a movie, that doesn't necessarily equate representation. I personally don't know of a lot of Asian-led and produced projects that also feature Asian actors, and I think that there definitely needs to be more of that. I also find that there's still this portrayal sometimes of like being Asian is like the main character trait in a way. So even if you have this character that is a lead actor, or, you know, not just like a supplemental character, that's sort of like their thing, is like they're Asian, and that's like the most interesting thing about them in a certain you know, mainstream like movie or show. And so it's sort of, yeah, I think it has gotten better over time, but for instance, like I don't see a lot of, you know, Asians in leadership roles in white spaces in mainstream media. As touched upon earlier, there isn't a lot of Asian queer content out there that I can name, you know, or Asians dealing with depression or disabilities, or maybe these things that are more stigmatized in certain East Asian cultures. And generally speaking too, I think there's still a problem with just treating Asians as a monolith and not really recognizing that, first of all, Asia is a huge continent, you know, huge continent, huge part of the world. And, you know, I don't see a lot of media about Northern Asians or South Asians and, you know, friends and family that, you know, identify as such, sometimes have trouble even accepting the term Asian American because they don't feel like it belongs to them, or that they fit within that. And then there's plenty of people I know who are adopted and, you know, I think or maybe don't identify culturally as being Asian, but because they appear as such, and people kind of assume like, oh, this is what you identify as, and this is sort of like, you know, this piece of media, like, or I don't know, this generalized fact like should apply to you, and that's not really, I think, a fair judgment. And so I think there is still, you know, even just subconsciously, like people kind of assume things about you because of if you appear Asian or East Asian, without really thinking beyond that and realizing that there's a lot of nuance and yeah, two people could, even like within a country, like you could have a complete like kiddo, without having explicitly like to beat people over the head with the fact that, I'm a minority, and like there's, just because I'm Chinese, it doesn't mean I share the exact same values or identity as other people from China. Like, I think that's all that nuance is still kind of missing in the media.
Along with just to go on Yifan's points, I think when you think of a lot of the misrepresentations and misperceptions, there are just so many. And I know that one that I am constantly thinking about and challenging is the portrayal of Asian women in media, because what a lot of people forget is there is this trope called the lotus blossom, where it perpetuates this idea, especially in film, that Asian women are servile to men. And the reason that I always bring this up is because what people forget is it might seem like a misconception in the film. And examples are in Mean Girls, Full Metal Jacket, Aladdin, Set It Up, Tomorrow Never Dies, like so many to this day. But the reason that all of those aren't just misconceptions is because they stem from colonialism and stem from the oppression of Asian women and just true violence in history against them still continuing. And I think that's why whenever I do think of a lot of the stereotypes perpetuated that do need correcting, I always have to remind people, and I know that this is like a really great space for all of us to talk about together, is that like it's never just your feelings being hurt, and it's never just that makes me very uncomfortable. It's always no, but those feelings are extremely valid because they come from a real historical violent place. And I think whenever I'm talking about this with other people, or if any of you enter that instance where you're like, this is not a stereotype that we should be discussing, I think that is also really powerful when you are ready to confront these misconceptions, is thinking about like the history of like, where did that stem from? Because that also really helps validate feelings when those misrepresentations are put on yourself.
And for me, I think the misrepresentation will cause lack of understanding, like both for Asian and for other races, and like lack of understanding will lead to fear, and fear eventually lead to hate. And so by exposing to stereotypes and only stereotypes over and over again under the influence of media, like it becomes very difficult for people, for Asian and AAPI to like navigate and explore and learn about their own racial identity, because the culture is not educational or representative for who they are, and for who they are. So like I hope that like for mainstream media, like they can actually use their power to highlight minority, and actually create roles and like and stories that shine a light on what actually make us as make us special, make us different, make us have our own personality. And we need more characters that are well-rounded and are truly representative of where we are.
Those were such beautiful, heartfelt responses. And yeah, I'm really holding on to what Kiddo just said about misunderstanding leads to fear, and fear leads to hate. And yeah, so we're going to move on to our next question. It's talking about the different experiences between Asian American artists and artists from China and all across the Asian diaspora. So I'd like to ask you all, what similarities and differences do we have about art creation and the cultural repercussions that reflect in mainstream media? And Kiddo, if you would like to get us started, that would be wonderful.
So I think for me, when it comes to art creation, I feel like I am still like trying to use art creation as a way to connect with my identity from my hometown. And I am actually don't know how to use the art as a way of establishing my identity here. And I'm really curious about Yifan and Ellie, like, since you lived here for a long time, like, do you feel any, like, which part do you feel stronger? And how do you balance your identity here as an American and your identity as Asian American? And when it comes to media, cultural repercussions that reflects in mainstream media, like, I think I'm still learning about it a lot, like, especially when it comes to the topics of cultural appropriation, like, because some of you might.
Just lost Kiddo. Hopefully she'll be able to join back in a moment. Do either of you have things you would like to share in the meantime?
Ellie, it looked like you were talking, but you're on mute, so I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, I can go. I was just gonna answer Kiddo's question. Yeah, as someone who was born in New York, grew up there, went to public school there till I went to Hopkins. I think, and also went to predominantly white schools until I went to Hopkins. I didn't really understand how to connect being Korean American and my art. I never saw them together. And so I think usually what happens is it becomes very corporate. I was very interested in marketing, and that was just creating a product. And I think what happened in terms of art creation was finding a community of similarly intersectional people. And that's when I realized how powerful it is to create art that's beautiful about who you are. I think that's what it took. Because sometimes you just can't come to that realization by yourself. And that's totally okay. If you need other people to be there to support you, to foster that thought, to foster conversation. And I think that is probably the most powerful thing you can have, especially when you do have a lot of misconceptions in the mainstream media, is to have people who can help you fight against that. So yeah, I think just for me, it was a recent development, but something that, yeah, I'm still growing to figure out.
Thank you, Ellie. Welcome back, Kiddo.
Hi everyone, sorry, my laptop just restarted.
That's all right. Ellie just answered your question. I wanted to check in if there was, you were in the middle of completing a thought when your laptop decided to restart.
Yeah, I would like to finish my sentence. So, like, when it comes to cultural appropriation, like, I think Asian people has very different perspective about it. Like, they love to see foreigners wearing their traditional dress, like eating their food and like doing their hairstyle and everything like that. But a lot of time, and Asian America would see the same thing and think that's cultural appropriation, that's disrespectful. And for me, it's like I have to like listen to a lot of people's point of views and like listen to them, like how they learn about how they think about this issue, like why this is okay or why this is not okay. And like I still couldn't have any opinions of my own. And like I think it's been like this since forever. And I'm just curious what everyone else sees about it.
Yeah, I think even as someone who's lived in the US for a while, I feel like that stuff is still, there's not like a straight right or wrong answer. Like it's still, to me at least, like something that takes a lot of thought and context, and it's not intuitive for a lot of people. And you can ask like, two people from the same place, and I think they could have very different answers. So you're definitely not alone. And I think, to go like another level with along that train of thought, I still have trouble sometimes figuring out like what parts of my cultural identity, I'm comfortable owning or representing in my work, because as someone who, is originally from China but hasn't lived there for a long time, sometimes I feel a little bit like a fraud, or like I'm not able to own some of those narratives and have a strong opinion on something that's very, very specific to an issue like in China, or having lived in Belgium, like how do I reconcile that part of my identity with these other things that aren't maybe more obvious to other people. My partner is Jewish, and we celebrate Jewish holidays. Like people have given me weird comments for posting about that and kind of perceiving it as like a weird form of appropriation in that sense as well. So I think it is something that it's tough to always show like 100% of yourself to people at all times, and there are going to be those types of conversations. But I think if they're approached with openness and care, and for instance, like if you're genuinely curious about, is this thing that I'm doing going to potentially offend somebody, or would my audience consider this appropriation? Like I think just the fact that you're having those thoughts, or like if anybody is having those thoughts, like I think shows this level of care that is really inherently not in the spirit of appropriating. And so I think that context really does matter, and being mindful, of the work that you're creating and the spaces that you're sharing that work within.
Yeah, I think on the topic of appropriation, that's something that I feel like I'm always putting myself down for. If I see something and it makes me uncomfortable, I'm like, but it's just something super little. And I think kind of a way that I have developed sort of validation for those emotions has been thinking, like you said, Yifan, like the context of who that person is. So if it is someone who has continuously, whether through their race, gender, or some form of identity, historically benefited through like the oppression of the culture that they're trying to appreciate, then that is appropriation to me. I know that can, for moments that I have made comments on it, has been a lot of, like Kiddo was saying, if I like there was these sorority groups who were wearing Asian attire, and I just that to a regular restaurant, and for no reason, for maybe a holiday or a moment, or to celebrate with friends who identify similarly. So I think the context is just always very powerful, because when you do point it out, you do hear them say, oh, I did think it was wrong. And I think that gut feeling is something that a lot of people, before they immerse themselves in another culture, think about, like, am I benefiting them, or am I benefiting myself? And that's something I'm always thinking about, especially I feel like with traveling and doing different projects abroad. That's also something to think about, is how much this is for you versus how much it is for what you're gaining from that culture. That's very powerful to just always be thinking about. But yeah, I think that's a conversation that is always circumstantial at that point too.
You all have so deeply, as Anika said in the chat. Oh, did someone want to add something?
I was just saying, well put.
Like Anika just said in the chat, so important to hold space for these complexities and nuances. And love what Anika said at the end too, about like the facets of identity when living American that can force us to flatten ourselves. And I think it speaks to how each of you have talked about, like, there's so many different experiences across the Asian diaspora. And I'm glad that you all have shared aspects of that tonight. So moving on to our next question, we have 3 questions left. The next question is, what does cultural power mean to you? And I would also love to hear like experiences of joy and celebration, and whatever you feel like sharing in relation to this. Yeah,
to start us off, I think, well, first, like moments of joy, I think, have been, I went back to New York this summer and was able to work with like all Asian American creatives on a lot of projects, and was able to work on a really great film that was mostly Asian American creatives. And I was like, this was euphoric. Like that's what it felt like. It felt just, for the first moment, that you feel like you don't have to explain anything. Everyone kind of exists in the same brain. And you're like, wow, it's not only joyful, you're also like, I feel a lot less pressure. I feel very relaxed. Like you have no guard up, and you don't realize how much guard you have up until you enter those moments. And you're like, this is very beautiful to be here with everyone. And I think what cultural power means to me, and what I've seen that it should, is just means respect and safety, which I feel like I have not seen being perpetuated in any sense. I think respect and safety means, like, if you do end up calling out a higher, either executive, professor, anyone, for something that really hurt you because of your identity, that means you still get to keep your job, you still get to keep your networking connections. And I feel like that is not something present. And I think respect and safety that comes from cultural power also means that right now I feel like there are but there is this new beginnings of opportunities given to a lot of people of color. And I feel that, again, it goes into this idea of like tokenization very quickly. I know just what I'm reflecting on is, I recently went to a second round interview for this really amazing fellowship that would open a lot of doors. And it was this idea that they wanted to have a very diverse, like 10 kids to network with different professionals. And I entered the interview very excited, thinking it was going to be a space where I get to talk about what cultural, like this question, what is cultural power? How do I manifest in art? And instead it was a space where they were just reaching and trying to find ways that I have been oppressed so that I can fill a story and bucket that they want to fill. And so I think I want to end this question with, cultural power isn't just like those opportunities, but it's also providing the space for your experiences to exist outside of their expectations. And I feel like that is most profoundly found in people that either identify really similarly to you, or people that you do confront and they are automatically ready to relearn, which I found is not extremely common and can be very draining, but is something that can be very powerful in terms of cultural power.
You spoke on the topic so beautifully. I just have a few more things to sort of agree with, echo and expound on. I think it's really, being able to not feel like you have to constantly explain yourself, being able to go in a space and feel safe and speak up for yourself without fear of repercussion, and just not having your narrative constantly framed by this dialogue of oppression or pain. And I agree, it's almost like again, something that's come up a lot over this conversation. Like, I have gotten the chance to be in spaces with other Asian American creatives in recent years, whether that was through an internship that was specifically, for Asian American youth, or other collaborations that I've done through MICA and outside of MICA. And it's been this really wonderful, I didn't realize like how much I was missing that, and how important it was to me until I was in that context. And I feel that way about other aspects of my personality as well. But I think especially in Baltimore, I didn't necessarily feel like I had as strong of an Asian American community. But even, because I do identify as somebody who grew up in a Chinese household, like, I think people, meeting people like Kiddo through my cohort, it's primarily Chinese students from China. And I think I was the only Chinese American. And even that was like a really wonderful space that I haven't gotten to just soak in, and, being around people who are making work about things that really resonate with me, but are so different and diverse. I think is a really, I don't know, for me, really embodies cultural power.
So similarly, I have an experience with a friend that I know, which was pretty surprising because she's like still studying right now and she wants to collaborate with me on a project. Like the good thing is that we came from the same undergrad. And like she wants to collaborate on a project that combines art and science. And like we both speak Chinese and like we both came from this STEM school and we have the similar experience. So it's kind of nice to see that someone could think of me to collaborate when it comes to solving like engineering problems. And I'm kind of excited about that part of experience because it's been like I was an engineering student before I was an art student. And I felt like probably I will never get reconnect with that part of me ever again. But having this chance to like work on science projects and art projects with someone who came from the same undergrad with me, from the same country as me, was like a very surprising moment for me. And like, so I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. I just wanted to also add one more. I just thought of it for cultural power. This is not my thought. I recently read it in Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism, which I highly recommend. It's maybe the first few chapters. It's very dense. Maybe also read with other people. But I think what he talks about is how a lot of cultural power also is found through self-esteem. And self-esteem is found through knowing what your real experiences are outside of any way someone's fabricated it. So it's whether, I think, reading a lot of books about someone who's similar to you, or reading about histories of like where you came from, where you are now, or about your geographical location or your family location. I think that is super powerful because the minute you do have that self-esteem in terms of just your identity, that can spread anywhere. And I think, of course, it's not just books. It's also films, it's music, it's anything that is representative of that. And I think that's also a very accessible cultural power, I think, for all of us.
Thank you, Ellie, for providing such a clear example of like how to find power in the truth. And realizing like things that we've been taught, things that have been perpetuated throughout our lives may not be that truth. We'll move on to our last two questions, and I'm going to combine them for the sake of time so that we can get to audience questions. So the first part of the question is, in light of the uprisings and the movements for Black Lives Matter and Protect Asian Lives, how do you view your work in relation to activism? And the second part of the question is, with that, which Asian and AAPI figures inspire you? That could be within movement spaces and media, et cetera, and how do they influence your work? And Yifan, I'll have you start this question for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of times we think about activism as an active act or campaign to influence positive change. It's, in the word. But I also feel like that comes with this expectation of having expertise in a certain topic or being really well versed. And I think for me personally, I really approached like the Black Lives Matter and Protect Asian Lives movements more as not so much an expert. Like I definitely don't consider myself like the most well-versed person in the history and everything that kind of led up to that. But I think just exploring them as an individual, trying to make sense of these topics in the world and things that I'm experiencing myself as an Asian American. And I think, I do find that a lot of my work, as I mentioned before, because it is reflective of my own experiences and current events, it does sort of end up serving as a form of activism. If anything, because I think, peers who happen to be non-Asian were kind of looking to me, just as, I was looking to friends who identified as Black, and just anybody who's sort of in the group that's maybe currently, in the main group in the conversation, like for guidance or maybe some, support to figure out like how they should be like thinking about the issues. And so I do feel like, yeah, just because of that, maybe there is more of this pressure or expectation that we're going to be the ones like having a say in it. But I also think it's, everybody within the group of Asian Americans or the Asian diaspora, like it has a slightly different take on it. And I'm wary of people sort of lumping together this view of like, oh, because I have this, I practice activism in a specific way, like that's how, all Asian Americans feel about this topic, or like that's the appropriate way to behave or express yourself. And so that, yeah, I think that's sort of my answer for the first portion. And then in terms of figures that inspire me, I did include a few in the portrait series, and I think these are really just, some of them, obviously, like Grace Lee Boggs is a really well-known social activist who's done a lot of great work, did a lot of great work throughout her lifetime. And then there are people like Varshini Prakash, who is a co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, which is a more explicitly, climate and political related organization. But then there are other people that I think maybe are more subtle activists in a sense. Like with Suni Lee, I think it was just really inspiring seeing somebody that looked like me and was doing something so amazing, such amazing athletic feat. And somebody who's from a fairly small minority group within East Asia. With someone like Chanel Miller, she, I don't think she set out to be an activist, but has like really through her work and beautiful writing and ability to express these really complex emotions, like become someone I really look up to as a creative. And then even people in media that I consume, I included Gemma Chan, who is not American, but she is one of many, I think, Hollywood celebrities that has used their platform to voice support and donate financially to various causes that try to combat Asian hate. And so I think that's also very admirable. And this all fuels into the conversation about cultural power, to just being able to see people who are doing things that inspire you and not having to like put all of your, have like one figure be like your cultural hero, or like the one person that you see yourself in media, and sort of embody all those things for you, but being able to see different, those different traits in a wide variety of people. And then I think also specifically during the movement for Black Lives, like I was really inspired by just learning, like looking back through history, like I had not been aware of the origin of the term Asian American kind of prior to last year, and just learning, about the Asian American Political Alliance in the 60s, and looking at current organizations that were doing similar work. One that I was specifically, I used their resources was a group that was, I think at the height of the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor protests. They were, I don't know if any of you are familiar, but there was something called Letters for Black Lives that provided multilingual resources for Asian Americans to be able to talk about BLM with their families who might not have English as their first language. And yeah, I think just the fact that like a lot of different AAPI communities came together to create these toolkits has been this really beautiful form of activism that has come out, during the Black Lives Matter and Protect Asian Lives. That is more about building community and safe spaces rather than protesting per se.
So I think activism is like kind of scary for some people, because it seems to take too much time and energy and like commitment, and could be risky. But that's why I think art activism is like a better way for artists. Like as artists, we are just naturally creative people, and like using art as our weapon like we are able to lower the barrier of entering the world of activism. And also like, well, actually, like last year, I have seen some people saying that like Black Lives Matter movement is not an art competition. You shouldn't be making art about it. But I like that really hit me in the beginning because I was like people are dying and I shouldn't like make art and post on my social media and like wait for people to look at it. But then I realized that I am an artist. Like art is my way to express my ideas, like communicate to the world. If like there are so many ways of activism, like people can protest in the street, like and people can talk about it using their platform. And I feel like there's actually nothing wrong with it. And an art is a non-violent way of showing your perspective. It's like asking for the government to change in a peaceful way. Like it hits the heart and mind instead of confronting people in the street or like in front of their buildings. And more importantly, I think art activism can have so many meanings. Like, so when I was creating my Mouth on Fire animation, the story initially was about like the false media propaganda about coronavirus. But I think the idea of virus is conveyed super vaguely at that time. Like people can't associate with coronavirus and pandemic in 2021, but people can associate the idea of like Asian hate crime in 2021. So like in different times and different places, like so many different things can be talked about through like one piece of artwork that may have multiple meanings. And I think that's very effective way for artists to show their point of view using their work.
Yeah, I think Kiddo's point about bringing up just how close performativeness can get to activism, I think that's a conversation I was having with a lot of people trying to figure out what that was and what that line meant. And I think it means outside of what you're comfortable with, which can be maybe posting art, maybe writing about something, you're dedicating everything to understanding that movement and understanding those struggles. And it's something that you don't show other people. I think that's the big part, is that you're doing like for your work to, for like not anyone's work to be activism for in the name of someone else or some other culture. It has to be a lot behind the scenes. It's like the entire dedication, all your time, all your experiences, all your relearning. That's super uncomfortable, but I think should happen simultaneously with like the beauty of art. So I think that is also super accessible and can totally happen. I know when I was thinking a lot about kind of what activism looks like, I think that there is no one way. And I know when I was speaking to within one of my courses, a mental health professional, and they were discussing how since last summer, a lot of mental health professionals have gotten like an insane uptick in their services. And that just describes how activism kind of means everything. And at that point, for that person, it meant being a mental health professional for all those people. And that is activism. Or it can mean holding space for someone else if you know that they are committing to something that, or something very hard is happening in their life, and you know that there's a lot going on, and it's just being there for them. And I think, yeah, activism just has any barrier. And and it's anything that's disruptive of a system that is not there and made for those people. So I think, yeah. And the reason that I wanted to bring that up is because activism is so draining. And like a lot of people think that it's only you have to go to certain marches or you have to commit to very visual aspects of it, but it's also the parts that are super hard, like going up to a close friend and being like, what you did was not okay to that community for these reasons. That's a very hard, difficult conversation. And that's also activism. And therefore it makes sense that you're drained. So I think that's something that I was thinking about is like your activism is also like providing that safe space for yourself to be like, hey, let's check in with myself, make sure you're okay, because you can't do anything else unless you are prepared. I think that's a big part that a lot of people forget, is that it's also should be self-inflicted.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for speaking to the different strategies of activism, how that can look, and that it's a life commitment. This is a marathon that we're all in together, and that speaks to how important it is to build our communities. And so now we're going to have the opportunity for audience questions. Thank you all for sticking with us through this just radiant discussion. And I want to raise the first question that was in the chat that says, how does Asian or AAPI representation relate to intersectionality to you? I'll drop the question in the chat too, so that you all can see it.
I think you can't have one without the other. They have to be together, because then you don't have representation, or you're not intersectional. And yeah, I think that one is just like, if you do want to be, you can't, because you can't choose which part of someone's identity that you enjoy, because that's not who that person is. So I think Asian American, and just Asian representation includes that part of intersectionality, just inherently.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. And I think it just, especially, I think, making a point to try to consume media or learn about different facets of what it means to be Asian or AAPI can really help us have a more holistic view of that community as a whole, and be more intersectional and grounded, because I think it does look different for different people within that group. And it can be harmful to just assume that like your personal experience is the collective experience of everybody else who identifies similarly.
Thank you. I'll give it a few more moments to see if anyone else has any questions, or if you all feel like sharing anything additional or asking questions of each other. I know from this conversation, I will carry so many things to think about, like the power of silence, the power of being, just being. And again, I just feel so grateful to hear about the ways that each of you are activists and are artists and are so many different roles of who you are. And that is such a reminder that we are not alone. We are still here. We've always been here. And our energy will continue together as we move forward and transform and reimagine all the ways that we can support and represent and just be as a community. And yes, I'm going to go ahead and close this conversation. Thank you, Yifan. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Kiddo. It has been such a joy to share space with you tonight.
Thank you, WeiAnne. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm just going to conclude. And I want to thank WeiAnne and Yifan and Ellie and Kiddo for this really fascinating and enlightening discussion. The comments were wonderful and really fascinating and interesting to hear. And I'm taking a lot with me tonight to think about. And hoping that everybody on this call will come back to us on October 21st, where we'll have our first session of Our Stories. It features 5 stories about confronting life's challenges by community storytellers from Maryland, California, the Philippines, and India. And again, thanks to all our supporters for making this event and our whole season possible. I want to shout out a special thanks to AA and CC Program Manager Nerissa Paglinowen for handling the tech, and for TU students, Alpha Sigma Rho sorority sisters, Amanda Lean and Isabel Cruz for managing our chat tonight. And thank you to Debbie for this transcription tonight. And thank you all again in advance. If you haven't already, please do complete our survey. We actually need those results to continue our programs and demonstrate to our funders that our programs are making a difference in people's lives and educating people and expanding their perspectives. And finally, don't forget to show your support with a donation that's comfortable with you to the Asian Arts and Culture Center. And Isabel is putting that link once more time in the chat. So thank you everybody for joining us and have a great night.
Good night, everyone. Talk soon.